Nashville, Tennessee, 1820. In the gentle haze of a humid morning, the world outside the Brooks farmhouse flashed gold and blue, a southern landscape brimming with promise. Yet beneath the tranquil sun, a disturbance almost imperceptible rippled through Franklin County. It was the kind of day that would go down as ordinary in the ledgers of time, at least until dusk, when the silence broke. Catherine Brooks had always been the quiet kind. She moved through the tiny town like a ghost made of silk, 17, cheeks pale, and eyes holding a brightness no one could read. Her laughter, honey-sweet, often dissolved the tension in any room. Mothers in church tugged their daughters closer, whispering that Catherine was a fine example, while men tipped their hats in respectful greeting. No one suspected the darkness that was gathering at the edge of her smile. Life at the Brooks farmhouse moved with the careful rhythm of routine. Thomas Brooks, her father, kept to the fields at dawn and dusk, his voice a low rumble that carried across cornrows and wild grass. Susan, Catherine's mother, filled her days with the soft clatter of kitchen utensils and the soft song of prayer. Their life was humble, predictable, until the disappearances began. It started with the animals. First a few chickens, gone, no trace. Then the family's only goat was found cold at the edge of the woods, its neck at a wrong, impossible angle. Whispers of coyotes drifted through the county, but those who lived nearest the Brooks claimed they saw Catherine drifting through the cornfields at night, barefoot, her thin dress trailing in the mud. Catherine's explanation was always a reassuring smile, gentle as the wind, and a simple whispered, "It's nothing." Her voice cut through suspicion, quelling gossip before it could twist into something ugly. But then came the long, stifling heat of mid-June, and the fragile normalcy of the Brooks family shattered. On the night of June 14th, they gathered for Sunday dinner, oil lamps flickering warm shadows across rough-hewn walls. Susan hummed as she moved from kitchen to table, and Thomas led Grace with his weathered hands folded, calloused, strong, protective. Catherine sat perfectly still, her eyes locked onto some unseen horizon, her smile sharp as broken glass. Shortly after midnight, neighbors were wrenched from sleep by a scream that sliced through the quiet unworldly in its terror. It lasted only a moment, but it echoed for a lifetime. When dawn spilled across the fields, Deputy Matthew Kincaid arrived to a scene forever etched into his memory. The farmhouse door stood open, banging softly in the wind, and inside devastation. Blood slicked the wooden floor, pooling beneath Thomas Brooks, who lay crumpled near the fireplace, throat cut so cleanly it seemed impossible. Susan's form was collapsed by the kitchen, her grip still clenched around a wooden spoon, her face frozen in shock, and at the table, with hands folded as if in prayer, sat Catherine. Her white dress streaked crimson, her face unmoved, her lips split by a soft, almost serene smile. "What happened here?" Kincaid rasped, his voice shaking with dread. Catherine looked up, her eyes gleaming darkly. "I helped them rest," she replied, the tranquility in her tone more chilling than any cry. The town rallied in a frenzy of fear and awe as news spread. A girl too young for the gallows, too cold for forgiveness. The sheriff, wary and rattled, had only one place to send her: Nashville Asylum for Women, a Gothic fortress with creaking floors, sour stone, and secrets older than the state itself. But Catherine seemed untouched by the walls that rose to swallow her. She sat quietly, never refuting, never lamenting, waiting for a fate no one could imagine. Her lips always curled in that enigmatic smile. In another world, this is where most stories would end. But for Catherine Brooks, it was only the beginning. Nashville Asylum for Women loomed on the edge of the city like a warning, its stone face blackened by rain and time, windows barred and smeared with condensation, corridors echoing with footsteps that seemed to belong to ghosts. They brought Catherine in just after sunrise, her wrists bound with rough rope. Her face betrayed no fear or regret. She looked up at the sky, watching a lone bird etch arcs above the rooftops, and then descended into the darkness that was to become her world. Her arrival unsettled the staff. Mrs. Hemphill, the matron, studied Catherine through gold-rimmed spectacles, noting the delicate features, the quiet dignity, the unnerving calm with which she held herself. "The girl has something in her eyes," Hemphill murmured to the orderly. She's seen more than she ever should. Most new arrivals came to the asylum trembling, shrunken, wild, clinging to tatters of hope. Catherine was different. She walked, forward without hesitation, her feet steady, unfazed by the shouts and weeping rising from the iron beds behind the heavy doors. The nurse who led her through the halls, Abigail, found her own voice faltering, unable to meet Catherine's gaze. Catherine was housed in cell 17, a bleak little space with a miserable view of moss and stone, a mattress thin and soiled at the corners, a barred window just wide enough for her hand to pass through. There she remained, silent, her presence marked only by the soft hum of notes she sang beneath her breath, old hymns and forgotten lullabies, turning the cell into a place both haunted and haunting. Dr. Silas Murchison, the superintendent, prided himself on his ability to break the most recalcitrant of patients. Tall, stern-faced, he entered Catherine's cell on her second evening, clipboard in hand. "You understand why you're here," he stated, voice clipped. Catherine nodded, unfazed. "Do you regret what you did?" he pressed. Catherine's answer came, quiet but clear, her lips barely moving. "I gave them what they wished." Dr. Murchison scribbled his notes, irritation passing like a cloud over his face. Most patients offered lies, tears, confessions, or silence. Catherine offered only certainty. It unsettled him, and he left early, telling the guards to watch her closely. Within a week, rumors swirled through the asylum halls. Some staff claimed the lights near Catherine's cell flickered without cause. Others found the air inside the cell unusually cold, even as the summer heat roasted the city outside. A patient in the adjacent cell whispered that Catherine spoke to shadows. Another swore Catherine was seen walking the corridors at night, though the locks remained unopened, the keys accounted for. Abigail, the nurse, was not given to superstition, but she noticed something unsettling. On her second night with Catherine, she watched the girl sketch shapes on the wall with her finger, humming that melody, a tune Abigail later recognized from Sunday services, meant to soothe, but now somehow sinister. "Children rest easy," Catherine sang, voice barely above a whisper. "Mothers rest long," Abigail asked quietly. "Are you scared in here?" The girl looked up, her smile returning, as ever soft and strange. "I don't fear these walls. They can't hold me." Not really. By the third month, the asylum's fragile system of order began to unravel. One evening, as dusk thickened into true darkness, a nurse named Ivy did not return home. Her bed remained unchanged, her shoes abandoned by the door. A search party scoured every corridor and stairwell, but no trace emerged. Ivy was the first. The missing continued. A week later, an assistant doctor vanished. Even the city police came, finding nothing. Then, behind the south wall, beneath the choking vines, a pair of shoes stitched by Ivy's hand surfaced overnight. By the time the staff dug through the soil, the body revealed itself, porcelain skin marked by a gentle smile. Each time, as the authorities gathered, as the matron wept, Catherine watched from the window. "They wanted to rest," she murmured. Matthew Kincaid, still bearing the horror of the crime scene in Franklin County, had followed the case with increasing devotion. He visited the asylum on official business, submitting to interviews with Dr. Murchison and other staff. His presence disturbed Catherine for the first time. When she saw him from her cell, her humming stopped. She watched him, head tilted, eyes narrowing as if searching for a memory. Kincaid was haunted not only by the carnage at the Brooks farmhouse, but by a journal he had found hidden beneath Catherine's bed, battered leather inked carefully in Catherine's neat hand. The pages contained odd phrases, bits of poetry and cryptic repetitions. "Smile for me. Rest easy. They only leave when it's time." Examining these words late into the night, Kincaid felt his own unease settle deeper. What did Catherine mean? Why did her victims, whether family or stranger, end life with a look of peace? Was she some silent messenger for those who could not cry for help? He brought the journal to Dr. Murchison, who dismissed the writings as products of a troubled psyche. But Kincaid felt sure the truth lay somewhere in those inked lines, and the compulsion that gripped Catherine, far from madness, was something darker. One autumn morning, the window of Catherine's cell stood wide open, The bars wrenched violently aside, though the hinges bore no sign of forced entry. The staff searched the grounds, but Catherine remained in her cell, sitting on her mattress, hands folded, smile gentle and unwavering. Only her shoes were gone, found that evening at the foot of the main stairwell, lined side by side beneath a patch of late-blooming violets. That night, Abigail approached Catherine. "Did you leave your cell?" Catherine didn't answer at first. Then, softly, "Sometimes I go where I am needed." The whispers grew bolder in the aftermath. Patients prayed for sleep, clutching worry beads and scraps of cloth. The staff kept double shifts, doors locked and checked twice each hour. Yet always Catherine remained inside, never pleading, never shouting, her energy drawing attention like a magnet, commanding both fear and fascination. For Kincaid, the mystery of Catherine Brooks was no longer simply the crime that had destroyed her family. It was a contagion, spreading outward, one peaceful face at a time. He began charting every disappearance, every shadow, every word spoken at Catherine's doorway. Slowly he realized each missing woman had visited Catherine's cell on her final day, always departing with a smile. He pressed Dr. Murchison, demanding stricter supervision, pleading for answers. But the asylum superintendent was consumed by embarrassment. "She is only a girl," he barked. "She cannot move unseen. Our asylum is secure." But nothing felt secure any longer. In the final days of that troubled autumn, as thunder broke over Nashville, and the asylum walls shivered in the wind, Matthew Kincaid returned once more with a new plan. A conversation alone with Catherine Brooks. Later, observers would remark that the atmosphere in the asylum shifted that week. The women seemed quieter, more fearful, the nights heavier, the staff distracted and on edge. Everything pointed towards Catherine, and yet there was no evidence, no answer, only those words she whispered as she turned away from the world outside her barred window. Rest is not always the end. For some, it's the beginning. As Kincaid prepared for his meeting, the rain lashed the stone walls, water pooling in the broken paths around the building. He thought of the Brooks farmhouse, the bodies, the blood, and Catherine's serene smile. He wondered if he was chasing evil, or simply the echo of pain too deep for words. He entered the asylum that evening with the journal clutched tightly in his hand, ready to finally face the girl who smiled while killing. The rain eased as Matthew Kincaid entered the asylum, though the sky outside remained heavy with promise and threat. Each step down the corridor echoed quietly, mingling with the distant sobs and nervous whispers that haunted every stone. It was deep into the evening, the hour when most residents had drifted into uneasy sleep. Catherine, however, waited in perfect stillness. He was shown to her cell by Abigail, who lingered at the door, concern shadowing her face. "She's been quieter," the nurse whispered, glancing at the girl inside. "Sometimes I think she's listening for something, or someone." Kincaid thanked her and slipped inside. The cell's light was weak, thrown from a lonely lamp outside the window. Catherine sat with her hands folded over her knees, her head tilted like she was considering the geometry of rain. The silence between them felt ancient. He began gently, his own voice barely above a tremor. "Catherine, why do you sing those songs?" She looked up, smile lingering on her lips. "People like to be comforted, especially when they're scared." He could see the journal peeking from his coat's inner pocket, the battered leather, the edges softened by Catherine's fingertips. "Oh, you wrote these words for those who died," he said, sliding the journal across the mattress toward her. "Did they find comfort?" "I don't think anyone ever really wanted to leave, but sometimes you have to help them rest." Her voice was clear, her gaze unwavering. Kincaid pressed further, pushing through the icy wall of calm. "Your family, the nurse, the patients, did they ask for your help?" A flicker moved through Catherine's features, like a thought she almost caught. "No one really asks, but when you see inside people, you understand what pain means. My father hurt all the time, even when no one saw. My mother wanted peace more than anything." Kincaid felt the ache settle in him. "And the others? Why them?" Catherine eyed the journal. "Some find me. Some are just close by when their time comes. I'm not always sure how I know. I just feel it, like a storm coming." Outside, thunder rolled, the sound muffling the world into stillness. He tried to keep the interview formal, but the lines crumbled. There are families asking for answers. The city, the police. What do I tell them? Catherine's smile faded for the first time, her brows creasing gently. That I see the world differently than most. I see what hides behind smiles. I see all the ways people say help me without words. The interview lasted nearly an hour, drifting between memory and confession, challenge and resignation. Sometimes Kincaid thought Catherine was trying to guide him through a labyrinth that only she could see. Sometimes it felt as if she was inviting him inside for the sole purpose of getting lost. He asked about the night at the Brooks farmhouse, the dinner, the scream, the blood. Catherine's answers, though direct, skirted the edge of emotion. She described her father's slow unraveling, her mother's gentleness, the way the house felt cold even in summer. When he pressed her, voice tight, "Do you regret it?" She met his stare with chilling honesty. "I regret only that no one else could help them." The air between them thickened until Kincaid couldn't tell where interrogation ended and understanding began. He felt a sympathy, unbidden, unwanted, for the girl in the cell whose suffering seemed so impenetrable, so alien, yet so terribly familiar. Abigail returned to escort him out. As they walked through the corridor, Kincaid asked, "Has she ever tried to escape?" Abigail shook her head. "Not once. Sometimes she leaves her cell, but never the building. The doors are always locked. The staff say she just slips past when no one's looking. It's as if the place itself lets her move." That night, Kincaid wrote in his own notebook, scribbling thoughts that felt half mad. Is Catherine Brooks truly evil, or is she doing what no one else dares? Is mercy just another form of violence? Over the next days, Kincaid read through Catherine's journal again and again, seeking patterns. He mapped out the casualties at the asylum, tracing their last moments. Everyone had come into contact with Catherine. Everyone had left wearing a smile. Yet the authorities were losing patience. Dr. Murchison was pressured to move Catherine to solitary confinement, to interrogate her under harsher conditions. But it was a useless gesture. No cell had ever contained Catherine, not truly. She moved through routine and barriers with eerie ease. Through it all, the legend of Catherine Brooks grew. Journalists sent letters requesting interviews. Some camped outside the asylum gates, eager for scandal. Stories spun out of proportion. Wild tales of supernatural forces, secret cults, forbidden rituals. But the reality stayed simple. A girl with a smile, a string of deaths and no explanation. Kincaid's obsession with her case began to consume him. He couldn't sleep, hardly ate, haunted day and night by the question, what drove Catherine? What lived behind her gentle smile? Meanwhile, within the asylum, the atmosphere grew brittle. Inmates began to chant prayers before sleep. Nurses crept down halls in pairs. Dr. Murchison, frustrated and alarmed, placed pressure on the city council to transfer Catherine. The council, equally baffled, considered options but decided, for now, that Catherine must remain, studied until an answer could be found. Kincaid decided to risk one final visit. On autumn's coldest morning, he arrived before sunrise, coaxing Abigail to unlock Catherine's cell early. Inside, Catherine seemed changed. Her hair, once neatly braided, hung loose around her shoulders. Her eyes, though calm, tracked Kincaid with something sharper than curiosity. This time she asked questions of him. "Why do you keep coming back?" Kincaid hesitated, then answered softly, "I want to understand what happened to you." "And what keeps happening?" Catherine nodded, almost approving. "Most people just wish I would disappear." He risked a final question, one he'd held back until now. "If you could leave here, Catherine, where would you go?" Her answer was chilling and gentle at once. "Anywhere the pain is." As the sun climbed outside, spilling orange through the bars, Kincaid left the asylum with heavy steps, carrying Catherine's journal and the new weight of her words. Whatever truths he'd hoped for, Catherine had only deepened the mystery. Back inside, Catherine pressed her head against the cold stone, humming quietly. The tune floated through the hallway, soft and unyielding as a prayer. Rest easy, sleep long. And just beyond her cell, another patient wept quietly, clutching her blanket. She would be the next to disappear. The walls of the asylum watched, listened, and waited. Catherine's smile, hidden in the gloom, remained unchanged. But outside, the world would never again see her as simply the good girl. The legend now stretched far beyond stone or blood, deeper into the shadows. where mercy and horror became indistinguishable, and where no one ever truly rested easy. Winter arrived early that year, sweeping across Tennessee with a sharp wind that sliced through the hills and crawled beneath the doors of every home. In Nashville, frost kissed the windows of the asylum, turning its cracked glass into sheets of murky white. Inside, the world slowed. Patients whispered less. Even the cries that once filled the night softened to faint murmurs, as though the very air had decided to hold its breath. For weeks, the name Catherine Brooks had been passed like a curse among the staff. Her cell had been moved twice, once to the eastern corridor, once to the basement wing. But no matter where they placed her, something always followed. The silence, the strange calm, the unexplainable stillness that smothered everything, even the walls. When Kincaid returned at the end of December, he was no longer the man who'd stepped into her cell months before. His face had grown gaunt, his eyes sleepless, his voice worn thin by questions that yielded nothing. The journal sat heavier in his thoughts. Its words no longer looked like the confessions of a killer. They read like scripture. He came not on duty this time, but alone, driven by conscience or madness. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he crossed the courtyard, a mist of breath trailing behind him. The guards hesitated at his request for entry, but yielded when they saw the trembling in his hands. He asked for Catherine. The matron refused. "She's been ill," she said, eyes avoiding his. "Quiet, yes, but not herself. You wouldn't want to see her." But Kincaid insisted. "She's never been herself," he muttered. "That's exactly why I need to see her." The matron relented. The door to the lower wing opened with a metallic groan, releasing a breath of cold air and the faint scent of damp stone. Catherine was there, seated on her bed, wearing a rough grey blanket around her shoulders, humming the same low tune that had echoed across months of sleepless nights. She looked thinner, more fragile, though her posture remained perfect. Her eyes lifted when Kincaid entered, and the faint ghost of that familiar smile rose to her lips. "You came back," she said softly. "I did," he replied. "You've been quiet." "Silence is easier when people stop listening," she said. He studied her for a long moment before placing the journal between them. "I've read everything. The names, the dates. Even before Franklin, there were others." Her face didn't move, but her fingers gripped the edge of the blanket. Kincaid continued, voice trembling. "In every town you lived, someone vanished. And every one of them met you just once." Catherine's eyes dropped to the floor. "You make it sound deliberate, isn't it?" he asked. She didn't answer. The silence stretched until the hum of the oil lamp filled the room. Kincaid leaned closer. "Tell me what this is, Catherine. Why them? Why always the ones who've suffered?" Her gaze found his, calm but brittle. "Because pain calls out," she whispered. "You can't hear it, but I can. It begs for quiet. I don't chase them. They come to me. And when they do, I give them what they already want. Peace?" Kincaid asked. "Rest," she said simply. "For some, it's the same thing." He felt anger rise, not righteous anger, but the helpless kind that comes when empathy outweighs judgment. "Oh, you think you're saving them?" Her smile tugged at the corner of her mouth again. "Don't you?" she asked. "Don't policemen claim the same thing? You put people down so they can't hurt again. You just call it law." Kincaid's throat went dry. The words stung because they weren't wrong. After a moment he spoke again, softer this time. "And who helps you rest, Catherine?" Her eyes wavered just for a second and then steadied. "No one," she said. "That's why I stay awake." He left her cell that night with the journal in hand and a heaviness pressing down on his chest. Outside, the storm thickened. Snow fell in thick, steady flakes, burying the city in silence, a silence that felt too familiar. Within the asylum, the pattern began again. The cook vanished first. Her apron was found folded neatly at the end of the hall, a single set of footprints leading nowhere. Then a guard, then one of the doctors, last seen locking the basement door. Always the same stillness. Always the same expression when the bodies surfaced near the river, eyes open, lips curved faintly upward. By February, the city demanded answers. The asylum board blamed neglect, disorder, even local vagrants, but no one believed it. Whispers of the girl who smiled while killing spread again, passed between mothers in markets and journalists at bar rooms. No one dared to say her name aloud in the dark. Kincaid tried to warn the council that something unnatural was happening, even if he couldn't explain it. "This isn't murder for pleasure," he told them. "It's something deeper, something she believes in." They dismissed him as unstable, chasing ghosts of his own. A week later, Kincaid received a letter left at his door without a name. The writing was neat, precise, unmistakably Catherine's. It contained only one line: "You're next to rest." He rode through the night back to the asylum, snow biting against his coat, heart pounding as though it might collapse under the rhythm. When he arrived, the gates were wide open, the front lanterns dim. Inside, the corridors were empty, the kind of emptiness that carries meaning. He found her cell door open. Catherine was gone. The matron was unconscious, the guards missing, and outside in the courtyard, faint footprints stood visible in the snow, bare feet leading toward the river. Kincaid followed them alone through the dead winter air until they vanished at the shoreline. He waited there until dawn. Catherine Brooks was never seen again. No one knows what happened that night. Some claimed she drowned, that the river finally took her into the rest she sought for others. Others swore she walked right across the frozen water and disappeared into the fog that shrouded the hills. The asylum was shuttered months later, left to rot at the edge of the city, its corridors echoing the faint melody of the girl who smiled through every storm. Years passed, but the stories never stopped. Farmers said they saw her silhouette in the fields before rain. Travelers heard her song near forgotten graveyards, soft as the wind. And somewhere, buried in the archives of old Nashville, Kincaid's last entry in his final report still remains. One thin, penciled line: "She smiled when I found her, but I think she was finally free." Years passed in Tennessee like the slow turning of sun-baked pages. The name Catherine Brooks faded from newspapers, but lingered in hushes and glances, alive only in rumor. The asylum where she had been held, once reeking of disinfectant and despair, now stood abandoned, its doors chained, walls spotted with creeping ivy. Yet those who lived nearby swore that on still nights they could hear faint humming drifting across the overgrown fields, the sound of a woman's voice singing a lullaby no mother would claim. Matthew Kincaid aged, though never gracefully. The lines beneath his eyes carved deeper each year, shaped by sleepless nights and unanswered questions. He left law enforcement behind, retreating to a modest home north of Franklin County, the same stretch of land where the Brooks farmhouse had long since collapsed. He tried to live, to plant, to forget, but forgetting was something a man like him could not afford. The past was patient. It waited at the doorstep. He kept her journal on his desk beneath a dim lantern. He had tried to burn it once, years ago, but when the flame touched the paper it sputtered out, ink refusing to vanish. Words survive where memory fails. Eventually he stopped fighting the strange sense that he was meant to remember her. Catherine had become more than a killer in his thoughts. She was a question without answer, one that gnawed quietly at the corners of his conscience. Every so often he took the journal out to read again. The handwriting still trembled with precision, each line carved by certainty. Rest is mercy. Rest is peace. Rest is the end of noise. The words never changed, but what they meant seemed to evolve inside him, twisting deeper, becoming something both terrifying and sorrowful. One spring night in 1832, 12 years after Catherine had vanished, a knock came at his door. It was after midnight, steady and deliberate, echoing through the quiet of his home like a ghost's heartbeat. Kincaid froze. Few people called at such an hour. When he opened the door, wind swept in, cold and sharp. On his porch stood a young woman, maybe 18, hair drenched from rain, eyes so pale they almost glowed beneath the lantern's light. Her clothes were torn from travel, her expression calm. "Deputy Kincaid?" she asked softly, as though reading his name from the air. He nodded, uncertain. "I was told you could help me," she said. "My mother." She never slept right. She used to hum something old. "I think you might know it." When she began to hum, the melody carved straight through his chest. A simple tune, 3 notes that rose and fell like a sigh. The same song Catherine used to sing in her cell. Kincaid's hand trembled. "Where did you hear that?" "My mother taught it to me," the girl replied. "She said it belonged to her cousin." A girl named Catherine Brooks. The world stilled. The air thickened around them, pressing the breath from his lungs. "Your mother's name?" he asked, his voice barely sound. "Abigail," the girl said. "She worked at the asylum. A nurse? Kincaid sank into a chair, his knees suddenly weak. Abigail, the nurse who had survived the storm of Catherine's confinement, the one person who had stayed kind to her till the end. She had vanished from all records years before the asylum closed. Kincaid had assumed she fled the city, unable to bear the memories. But now, staring at this living echo before him, he knew there had been no escape. The girl watched him with cold patience. She used to talk about her cousin as though she pitied her, said she didn't want her to be alone. That's why she sang at night. Catherine didn't have cousins, Kincaid murmured. Her family died before the war, every relative gone or buried. The girl tilted her head gently, the same motion Catherine used to make. Then how did my mother know the song? Wind rattled the shutters. Rain whispered against the window pane like fingers over glass. Kincaid could feel his heart faltering in time with that sound. He moved slowly toward his desk, retrieving the journal, its pages yellowed but intact. This belonged to her, he said cautiously. Your mother's cousin, the one who smiled. The girl stepped forward. Her eyes traced each letter, as if recognizing something long forgotten. She wrote the words my mother used to say before she went quiet. Kincaid dared to ask, though fear clung to every syllable. What happened to your mother? She stopped waking up, the girl whispered. One night she just slept and smiled. Silence swelled between them, heavy and absolute. Kincaid opened the journal to the final page, a section he'd never fully understood. Beneath Catherine's neat handwriting, a fourth verse stood incomplete. They come to me gentle, their noise fades like dust. I take nothing from them, they only choose to trust. It chilled him in the same way truth does when it finally surfaces. Too late to offer solace, too clear to deny. The girl looked at the words as though reading her own future. She said the smile was a sign of peace, she murmured. He closed the book carefully, almost like one might close a coffin. Peace isn't always innocent, he said. Sometimes it's just the quiet left after everything else is gone. That night, after sending the girl to town for lodging, Kincaid sat by his window, staring out at the storm. Through the glass, he thought he saw a figure moving across the edge of his field, barefoot in a thin dress, walking slow beneath the rain. A tune hummed faintly, carried by the wind. He knew that sound. He always had. By dawn, the prints in the mud were gone. Only the faint scent of iron and violets lingered. Months later, a traveller passing Kincaid's home found the place empty, door ajar, lamp extinguished, but still warm to the touch. On the table lay the journal, open to its final blank page. Across it, a single line appeared, written in smooth, deliberate ink. He smiled when I came for him. For the rest of that year, folks spoke in murmurs when the wind blew softly through Franklin County. They said Catherine Brooks had finally kept her promise, that she went where the pain was. Others believed she had never left at all, just passed her story from one wounded soul to the next. No grave bears her name. No record marks her end, but in quiet houses, in moments before sleep, when the world grows still and hearts ache just enough, sometimes a voice soft, familiar, and unhurried, can be heard singing from the dark. And when it comes, it always carries the same refrain: rest easy, sleep long. The story of Catherine Brooks did not die with Matthew Kincaid. It spread quietly, surviving by word of mouth, twisting each time someone tried to tell it. To some she became a ghost story told by firelight, a caution whispered to lull children into sleep. To others she was something else entirely, a kind of grim deliverer, a phantom who brought peace to the broken. In towns scattered across the South, from fainting hills to river valleys, reports began to merge into a familiar rhythm. A widow in Pulaski claimed she'd seen a girl in white standing by her late husband's grave, her face calm, her smile kind. 2 nights later, the widow was found still in bed, hands folded, eyes open, lips curved in small gratitude. A farmhand in Murfreesboro was said to have followed a voice singing across the fields. He never came back. When his brother went searching, only his shoes remained, placed neatly beneath a tree blooming out of season. The investigators chalked it up to myth, to coincidence, but the pattern was impossible to ignore. Where suffering festered, the song came. Where despair took root, so did that sleep. Peaceful and permanent. By 1841, journalists from Nashville began republishing the story from Kincaid's old files, the same brittle papers found in his abandoned home, and the name Catherine Brooks returned to print. But this time it came not with condemnation. The headline read, "The Girl Who Ended Suffering." The words unsettled the city's clergy, who took to their pulpits to denounce the article as the devil's trick. Still, the fascination grew. In letters, sermons, and tavern talk, people wondered if Catherine had been more saint than sinner, more wounded than wicked. Among the curious was Reverend James Halper, a young preacher from the outskirts of Columbia. He had lost his wife to fever, his faith to grief, and his sleep to the humming he began hearing on windless nights. What frightened him most was not the sound itself, but the longing it stirred. It soothed him, the way a mother soothes a dying child. So he began to investigate, not out of duty, but hope. Halper traveled first to Franklin County, retracing the pathway to where the Brooks farmhouse once stood. All that remained was the foundation, broken stones and creeping vines. Local children avoided the site, but one boy, maybe 10 years old, told him he sometimes saw a woman sitting there at dusk, smiling and singing to the ground. "Like she's waiting for someone," the child said. The Reverend stayed that night. As the moon lifted, pale and cold, he did hear something, a faint rhythmic hum drifting through the trees. It seemed to swell and fade, a heartbeat woven into sound. He prayed until dawn, repeating the words he barely believed anymore. No one came. Yet as he rose to leave, he noticed a single flower pushing through the frost, a violet blooming out of place, its petals damp with dew. He left Tennessee that morning, certain he had brushed against something that breathes beyond reason. Meanwhile, the official records, the ones that matter to men in offices, kept their silence. No body ever found, no trace discovered, not even a sighting officially logged. Catherine Brooks remained both everywhere and nowhere, a silence that people could feel but never prove. For those who studied her, the pattern grew simpler. Those who died after hearing her voice all shared the same thing: exhaustion, grief, shame, or an unnamed emptiness. Not one of them had cried out. Their peace looked chosen, and then came the stories from far away. In Kentucky, a prison guard resigned after reporting nightly singing from an empty cell block. In Georgia, a doctor wrote to his colleagues about a case of shared delirium involving 3 patients who claimed a woman visited their ward at midnight, touching their foreheads before they fell asleep smiling. In every report, every whisper, her description stayed faithful: young, barefoot, calm, with a voice that sounded like forgiveness. By the 1850s, more than 3 decades after she vanished, Catherine Brooks had become folklore. Street vendors sold penny pamphlets of her tale, painting her as both killer and comforter. Mothers in distant towns used her legend to hush their children. If you don't rest, Catherine will come sing for you. The name traveled so far that travelers in New Orleans swore her melody rode the Mississippi wind, but some refused to forget the human truth. At the Nashville Historical Society, archivist Annabel Gresham stumbled across the surviving pages of Kincaid's personal journal, a companion notebook never listed among his case files. Inside, she found a final account dated March 1834, 2 years after his disappearance. The handwriting was uncertain but readable. She came as promised. Not cruel, not gentle, touched my hand and I felt nothing left to fear. That line made her shiver, not for what it said, but for what it didn't. When she filed the document for preservation, Gresham decided to visit the old asylum grounds for curiosity's sake. Most of the structure had collapsed, but one cellar room still stood beneath the soil. There she found traces of old bunks, rusted chains, and one thing she would never explain: a single shoe folded neatly beside the door, and a bloom of violets pushing through the floor. Annabel never returned to work after that day. Her colleagues found her at home, lying peacefully in her chair, papers still spread around her, a faint smile upon her lips. After her death, her replacement sealed her research without reading it. But sometimes, when visiting scholars opened that particular cabinet, they swore a scent lingered inside, iron and violets, soft and cold. And so Catherine lived on, stitched into the landscape like a thread that never frayed, her story changing form but never disappearing. She had become the lullaby of a nation, of mothers, wanderers, and the hopeless. Some said she was wickedness draped in mercy. Others said mercy dressed as wickedness. Yet all agreed on one thing: she brought silence. Even now, on still nights in the hills near Franklin County, when grief hangs heavy as dawn fog, people swear they hear her song. It drifts across the fields and down the riverbanks, quiet as breath, tender as memory. Rest easy, sleep long. Time, relentless and indifferent, marched onward through the Tennessee hills. Yet for those attuned to the quiet eddies of suffering and salvation, Catherine Brooks remained a presence, unseen, unclaimed, but as real as the ache of loss. Generations grew up on her story. Children who learned to hush themselves at dusk, old women who left violets at crossroads each spring, drifters who hummed under their breath when the road seemed long and dark. But what no one realized was that Catherine's influence had shaped a single living memory, a final witness who decades later would seek her truth. Her name was Clara Ashford. Born in 1868, on the same patch of earth where the Brooks household had stood, she inherited the land through family unknown to her. Clara was a teacher, a thinker and a skeptic. She measured the world in facts, not stories. Yet something about the house, even in its ruined state, unsettled her, especially at night when the breeze sighed through broken walls and carried with it a melody she could neither remember nor forget. Clara's mother, a steadfast woman of reason, had told her the stories were nonsense, meant to scare the weak-willed. "No one sings in the dark for you, Clara," she insisted. "Only you decide when you rest." But Clara felt the weight of eyes upon her whenever she walked the old paths, as though a part of the earth remembered, wanted her to remember too. That feeling became a companion during her sleepless years, as the world changed rapidly beyond the hills of Franklin County. In the spring of 1894, Clara returned home after her mother's funeral. The ache of loneliness, sharper than any sorrow she had known before. As she wandered the remains of the Brooks farmhouse, trying to claim the grounds as her own, she stumbled on remnants of a life lost to history, fragments of crockery, a button, a strand of hair ribbon bleached by sun and time. Near the trunk of an old maple, she found something stranger. A musty book eaten at the corners, pages filled with careful looping script. The name on the inside cover caught her heart. Matthew Kincaid. Clara spent hours reading the account, pouring sunlight and herself across lines that were sometimes frantic, sometimes tender, all haunted by the same refrain, peace, rest, mercy. The more she read, the less she could dismiss Catherine as merely legend. She began to sense the story's weight, the fissures it had left in her community, the strange tenderness that underpinned its horror. For the first time in her life, she prayed, not out of fear but of yearning to understand. That night, Clara dreamed of music. She wandered fields thick with mist. Somewhere ahead, a figure moved, barefoot, dress gleaming beneath the moon, a silhouette painted in shadow. Clara called out, but her voice only drifted, lost. Laid over the landscape was that lullaby, a tune she recognized in her bones. Each verse pressed against her soul, offering comfort, though she woke with tears lining her cheeks. Compelled, Clara ventured into town. She spoke with elders whose memories reached into the century past, gathering what shreds of Catherine's story remained. Every tale came wrapped in paradox, a monster who offered mercy, an angel who heralded death. Not a single soul could say with assurance whether Catherine Brooks had been a curse or a blessing. Determined, Clara pressed further, retrieving whatever records remained in musty government archives and sun-faded ledgers. Always the pattern returned, unexpected peace carved into the faces of the lost, violets blooming from disturbed ground, the lullaby heard where suffering refused to sleep. Yet Clara found something that no one else did, buried near the final pages of Kincaid's journal, perhaps missed by all other hands. It was a short letter, never delivered, addressed to the one who questions. Inside, in a shaky but insistent hand, Kincaid wrote his final thoughts. "You have come seeking evil, perhaps pardon. You'll find neither. There is only understanding. Mercy is not the absence of pain, nor is it the promise of sleep. It is standing beside another's suffering without flinching, even if it breaks your heart." Catherine Brooks did what she could with the pain she found. God judge us all. The impact of the words left Clara breathless. She realized then that the shadow which had haunted her family's land was neither a threat nor a promise. It was a presence, insisting that suffering not be hidden or denied but recognized, witnessed and, when possible, eased. From that night forth, Clara began to change how she lived. Her neighbors noticed she visited the sick more often, sat with the dying longer, lingered with grieving mothers until morning chased away ghosts. She hummed softly as she moved through kitchens and graveyards, a song many said sounded sweetly familiar. And the violets around her home seemed to thrive, blooming twice each season, purple and wild. Clara lived to great age, respected and cherished by those who knew her gentleness. When she finally grew ill and the end walked quietly near, she did not fear. On her last evening, as dusk pressed close to her window, she smiled, eyes shining with knowledge gathered through a lifetime of witness. Those who watched over her swore they heard a melody floating through the house, a lullaby's refrain promising not oblivion, but gentle rest. On that night, for the first time, Clara Ashford dreamed not of shadows or sorrow, but of a girl in white standing amid fields of violets, offering a hand and a song. Rest easy, sleep long. And Clara, the last true witness, let go with a peaceful heart. Long after, when the house at Brooks Hill had finally fallen and wildflowers overtook its stone foundation, strangers walking through would pause at dusk, hearing music where none could be. Some said it was only wind in the grass, but others knew. Catherine's story and the message of mercy she brought would always live on in those who dared to witness, listen, and stay beside the broken, no matter the cost. Time wears away even the deepest wounds, but some stories, unbound by stone or ink, find a way to linger. So it was with Catherine Brooks, her name fading from law records and whispered gossip, only to root itself deeper in the quiet spaces left behind. In the decades that followed her disappearance, Tennessee changed. The cities grew, the land shifted, but the fields where her family's farmhouse once stood returned to wildness, violets rising stubbornly each spring as if called by memory. No one alive could claim to know her truly, yet her legend refused to die. It slipped between generations, weaving itself into country songs and prayers, into the hush that follows loss. She became for some a ghost, for others a secret guardian, an emblem not of terror but of mysterious mercy. When thunderstorms crowded the Nashville sky or long illnesses wore down the frail, parents spoke softly of a girl who brought peace to the suffering. Most dismissed it as country superstition, but behind closed doors and in sleepless midnight hours, the ache of her story was real. Doctors and nurses in small clinics sometimes found patients at peace in the most unexpected ways. Grieving mothers, injured soldiers, lonesome workers, each found motionless before dawn, hands folded, lips just curling with the faintest smile. These episodes were explained away by science, by hope giving way to exhaustion. But sometimes a nurse would find a single violet on the pillow, and not knowing why would tuck it gently away. The myth traveled far beyond her home. In distant towns, where people had never walked Franklin County's roads, a lullaby took root, sung in low voices to frighten children or the dying. Rest easy, sleep long. It drifted across hospital halls, prison corridors, battered classrooms and broken homes, each time carrying with it a promise of gentleness in a world too often unkind. Old scholars debated her story, dismissing the killings as dark legend. Yet the archives told a subtler tale. Each documented death touched by Catherine or her memory involved some kind of release, a soul caught between agony and longing for peace. Archived correspondence, yellowed and delicate, spoke of grief changed into acceptance, turmoil settled like dust by a night's rain. Over and over the refrain, "She was here." I rested. With repeated retellings, Catherine's image softened. She was no longer simply the girl who'd smiled at horror, but one whose smile was ambiguous, capable of both unsettling and consoling those it touched. In quiet households, especially as loved ones faded toward death, the legend gave hope. Some said Catherine visited the lonely. Others believed she was only there for those who could bear no more pain. By the 1890s, her story became the root of countless poems and ballads, rising as the world itself became louder and change crowded out the old stillness. One such poem, composed on the fields where violets bloomed, captured her legacy not in the act of death, but in the grace of her farewell. She brings no promise, no warning, only the lightest hand at dusk. She finds the hungry, the hurting, the weary, and if they ask in silence, so she listens. The world slips, pain folds itself quiet, and in her song, even the desperate rest. As the 20th century dawned, cities built, trains racing across Tennessee's backbone, her tale endured, carried by travelers, scholars, and the wanderers who found solace in forgotten corners. There was no monument for Catherine Brooks, no single grave for mourning. Her story was carried instead in voices, the songs of mothers humming over cribs, the hush of nurses watching over feverish patients, the confessions of those who had lost too much but come to crave mercy in any form. Sometimes, as rain fell on empty fields or wind pressed soft through grass, someone walking alone near the ruins of the old Brooks land would pause. Just at the edge of sense, a melody floated, uncertain, unfinished, yet deeply familiar. Rest easy. Sleep long. They might dismiss it as wind or memory, but the comfort lingered. Catherine Brooks herself became less important than the silence she left behind. It was a silence not of emptiness, but of presence, a hollow that gently asked the restless world to pause, to be seen, and for a moment to let the noise go. She showed that sometimes the greatest mercy is not in ending pain, but in bearing witness to it with quiet understanding. So, the legend persisted, not in the horror of violence or the mystery of her disappearance, but in the spaces between, where pain met patience, and anguish found relief in a song only the troubled could hear. There remained the echo of Catherine's promise. Across generations, as candles guttered and sunlight waned, her refrain circled back for all who ached. Rest easy, sleep long. And in those moments the world, despite all its sorrow, listened and in a rare hush found peace. Every family hides secrets, some so dark they should never see the light of day. Here, we open the doors to those shadowed pasts, uncovering hidden crimes, silent pacts, and stories that echo like ghosts through the halls of memory. If you've made it this far, it means you also carry that forbidden curiosity. So don't hesitate. Subscribe to the channel now, turn on the bell, and follow our next revelations. Because every day, new secrets emerge, and only those who dare to face the truth remain to hear them.